Let's face it, nobody has time to play every game. Inevitably, hundreds of titles will be left in the dust for more popular franchises or buried in the ever-growing mountain of indie games. Even if every gaming YouTuber on this site made a top 10 list, there would be countless games worth your time left unmentioned. Really, 10 doesn't even do a list like this justice, so don't think of this as the definitive 10 games that you refuse to play. These are just the 10 best games I've played that didn't get the praise, attention, or copies sold that they deserve. Vex, the Shadow the Hedgehog of Collectathon games. Wait, before you stop the video, just hear me out. Unlike Edgy the Hedgie, Vex is actually a surprisingly good game released by long-dead developer Acclaim. It's essentially Super Mario 64 with simple beat-em-up mechanics in a dark fantasy setting. There's something strangely surreal and fantastical about the atmosphere of this game, and combined with the ambient soundtrack, it can feel pretty melancholy. My favorite level is Tempest Peak Manor, the home of a giant with suspiciously human furnishings and technology. The Wraith Hearts are collected in really creative ways, including playing a game of Breakout, climbing inside of a grandfather clock, and flushing yourself down the sink. The best part of the level though is the emaciated dinosaur pet that eats you if you fall to the ground. Sadly, Vex was released back in 2003 when Collectathon franchises had either died or completely shifted genres. Even being multi-platform, it didn't sell enough copies to save Acclaim from bankruptcy the next year. It's definitely not the best 3D platformer, but if you love this type of game, it's definitely worth checking out. If I had to name two PlayStation franchises that nobody cares about, it would be Killzone and Resistance. While I think Killzone 3 is pretty fun in co-op, it's fairly generic otherwise. Resistance 3, on the other hand, is Insomniac Games playing to their strengths. The first two games were nothing to write home about, but the third added in the Ratchet Clank game's greatest mechanic, weapon leveling.
Level 2 Combustion Rounds.
The weapons themselves are far less realistic as well, like a marksman rifle that can launch automatic turrets, a freeze gun, and a magnum that fires sticky bombs. So while you're experiencing this totally serious, gritty story about the last remaining humans in a world dominated by an alien parasite, you can level up your mutant explosive tumor gun. The campaign is co-op too, so grab a buddy and blow some shit up. I already made a half-hour long video explaining why Rage is great, and nobody gave a shit. So that pretty much reserved it a spot on this list. To briefly summarize my review, it's got awesome shooting mechanics and a surprisingly useful crafting system that makes for a really fun linear shooter. Too bad it's not actually linear and is plagued by an empty open world and shitty driving mechanics. If you just stick to the story missions, you'll have a great time. The Souls game that started it all. Due to being stuck on PS3 with no remaster in sight, there's a shit ton of the fanbase who still haven't played this excellent game. Demon's Souls is unique in the franchise for its world tendency mechanic. Basically, if you die while human, the game gets harder, and if you beat a boss, it gets easier. But what really sold it for me was that new sections of the level would be unlocked if you achieved pure white or pure black tendency, which encouraged you to either attempt a perfect run or play the entire game in soul form with only half your HP or 75% with a ring. Personally, I love the challenge. The items that restore your humanity are much rarer than any of the other games, giving Demon's Souls a very unforgiving reputation that it doesn't really deserve. It's much easier than Dark Souls or Bloodborne, as long as you don't select the harder levels first.
I'm gonna kill him. Oh, no you're not. This is it. This is the end.
Oh, no, you are so
no.
If you've got a PS3 lying around, this is a great entry point into the franchise.
Ooh, that final blast hit him right in the PP.
The forgotten JRPG of the 90s. Before Xenoblade or Xenosaga, there was Xenogears. Xenogears combines martial arts with mecha to create an awesome retro-futuristic sci-fi world. The game is one of the few turn-based RPGs that has virtually no required grinding whatsoever. Nearly all of your party's strength comes from equipment and attack combos, which can be acquired by just playing the game normally. The giant mechs are giant mechs. Need I say more? As you learn new moves on the ground, your mechs learn them too. But like any good RPG, the true appeal is the story, and Xenogears has a fucking great story. I don't want to spoil it, but expect heavy religious themes, mutant racism, classism, romance, and history repeating itself in the literal sense. But despite all of this cool stuff, there is a catch. Xenogears is unfinished. Once you get to Disc 2, the game basically turns into a slideshow until the final boss. It's really sad because I loved the game until that point. I still think the game is worth playing. You get a solid 40 hours in the first disc alone, but just mentally prepare yourself for the severe drop in quality after that.
Time to release the parade surprise. Run it, darling!
Despite being one of the more popular indie games released in the past few years, A Hat in Time still hasn't received the attention it deserves. 3D platformers have been dead as a genre for essentially 15 years. While I've definitely loved all of the remakes of the classics, we need some fresh blood. And A Hat in Time is just what the doctor ordered. It combines smooth, precise platforming controls with a colorful world filled with charming characters. You'll meet a crazy chef mob boss, a short-tempered owl conductor, a charismatic soul-stealing demon, and more. If you grew up with Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, or Banjo-Kazooie, this game is guaranteed to put a smile on your face.
Fool! Oh, wait, it's you. I was kind of expecting a new victim to step in my traps. I've already taken your soul and everything. Have you even completed your contractual obligations yet?
The most impressive thing about this game is the sheer level of production quality and polish for a small indie studio. Mafia Town is probably the most densely packed and detailed level I've ever played in a platformer. Even if you have no interest in indie games, just give this one a shot. Originally, I was gonna put Dishonored or Deus Ex Human Revolution here, but the more I thought about it, I realized that other than the Metal Gear franchise, the stealth genre as a whole is ignored by most gamers. I don't know if it's because most people have no patience, or only want to play high-octane, twitchy bro shooters, but stealth has been shit on more than survival horror in recent years. Dishonored 2 and Hitman bombed, and Deus Ex Mankind Divided undersold and disappointed. The only time this genre gets any kind of attention is when goofy-ass Let's Players play Hitman.
Real bad when it turns out that he's worried.
Oops.
Oh boy.
Oops. Oh fuck.
You've seen nothing.
Oh,
Close the door.
Ryan, no.
Just close the door. Oh boy.
Bam!
He really winds up, doesn't he?
You people need to step outside of your comfort zone. Don't you get tired of playing the same types of games over and over again? There's nothing quite like sneaking through an entire enemy base undetected, or beating the entire game without killing a single person. Just give them a shot. You can get any of the greatest ones dirt cheap these days. What do you have to lose?
Just stay alert.
Darksiders is the Reese's Peanut Butter Cup of video games. Smashing together God of War and The Legend of Zelda has made for an excellent hybrid of the action-adventure and hack-and-slash genres. Zelda games have always had overly simplistic combat, which always annoyed the hell out of me. So adding a bit of complexity, enemy variety, and progression systems made for a unique game that stands apart from its clear inspirations. The dungeons are pretty much what you'd expect. There's keys, simple puzzles, and a boss at the end. What's interesting about them is where they're located. Since the game takes place on Earth, the dungeons take the form of a mansion, a subway system, and skyscrapers covered in giant spiderwebs. The 90s image, dark horse, comic book proportions, and fantasy angels and demons is a little over the top compared to the post-apocalyptic modern city streets, but I find it charming personally. I'm confident that it's the second best Zelda game without Zelda in the title. First place goes to Okami, but Darksiders takes its spot on the list for being far less well known and because its two sequels lost what made Darksiders special in the first place. Hack and slash games are fairly rare these days, with action RPGs having almost completely replaced them. So if you're a fan of the older God of War games, Darksiders is for you.
Wind, 3 knots, heading 274. Range, 95 meters. Projectile mass, 89 kilograms. Trust me.
I think I'm going to need some new underpants.
Copy that. Noted for the next supply drop.
Now, I know a shit ton of people have talked about how underrated this game is, but seriously, it needs to be said again. If you claim to be a fan of shooters and haven't played Titanfall 2, you should be ashamed of yourself. Who wouldn't want to play a game where you can double jump, run on walls, grapple to the top of buildings, climb into giant mechs, splatter infantry with your giant robot fist, rip out a Titan's core and blast into its back, and much more badass shit. Not to mention it actually has a really good campaign, with the best giant robot friend you could ask for. Seriously, just play Titanfall 2. It's some of the most casual fun you can have in a multiplayer game outside of Halo or older Battlefield titles. Before we get to number 1, I'm going to briefly mention a few other great games you probably haven't played that just barely didn't make the list. Persona 3 started the crazy anime high school life simulator JRPG subgenre, but most people have only played 4 or 5. While I'll admit the sequels improved on the mechanics and have a higher level of polish, Persona 3 is still a damn good game and perfect for anybody itching for more Persona. The ultimate supervillain franchise, and the closest thing we'll ever get to a Venom game. Devouring helpless citizens has never been this satisfying. If you like superhero games, Prototype is easily one of the best. Honestly, just play either one and you've played them both. If I were making this list purely on nostalgia, the first 3 Ratchet & Clank games would take the top 3 slots. Without a doubt, they're the best games in the action platformer genre, don't at me. They're unparalleled in charm, writing, and pure fun factor. Only reason they didn't make the list is because a lot of people have actually played them, but still not enough. Evil Within 2 is actually really good, especially compared to the first one. The shooting has been refined, there's actual survival horror mechanics, and the game world is comprised of small sandboxes instead of a bunch of linear pathways. If you're a Resident Evil fanboy like me, give it a chance, you won't regret it. Anime XCOM with real-time shooting. Actually a pretty fun strategy game. Don't let the anime style put you off, the story is actually fairly serious, but with plenty of comic relief and genuine heartfelt moments. The gameplay is uniquely hands-on for its genre, featuring manual movement and aiming for each unit you control. So if you've ever thought strategy games needed a more personal touch, Valkyria Chronicles is for you.
The hour of the turning back is past. The world will have its answer. You or me. Death or life beyond. If you would gain aught.
Have you ever wanted to climb onto a Cyclops' face and stab it in the eye? Dragon's Dogma lets you do that. Have you ever wanted to grab a defenseless NPC and toss him off of a cliff? Dragon's Dogma lets you do that. Have you ever wanted a character creator where you can change the height, weight, musculature, and voice pitch to ridiculous levels? Saints Row lets you do that, but so does Dragon's Dogma. Much like Darksiders, Dragon's Dogma feels like the developers slapped together popular games of the past to create something wholly unique. The entire game is built around the excellent combat mechanics, which sprinkles in elements of Dark Souls, Monster Hunter, and Shadow of the Colossus to create one of the greatest action RPGs of all time. There are 9 different classes to choose from, each a variation on the classic trio of fighter, rogue, and mage, but with completely unique movesets and abilities. If you get bored of one, you can switch to another at any time. The rest of your party is made up of soulless husks of flesh called pawns. What's cool about them is that your first one is your personal, fully customizable waifu. The other 2 are other players' pawns uploaded online that you are free to recruit from at any time. And as you can imagine, player-made pawns means running around with hideous, deformed subhumans. But truly, where this game shines, is the boss fights. You can climb onto any monster and bash it in the face. It never gets old. It's even more fun when they grab you and bite a chunk out of you or smash you into the ground for being careless. But sadly, Dragon's Dogma has a fatal flaw that will put off most casual players: the severely limited fast travel. The original version of the game is borderline unplayable because of it. I'm not even going to explain it, just trust me. The Dark Arisen version gives you a few more placeable warp points, which makes a big difference, but it's still obnoxious. The flaws don't end there. The game world and its story are pretty generic until close to the end of the game, and most of the side quests are shit. Unless you're a hardcore completionist, just skip them. The Dark Arisen version of the game adds an enormous new dungeon and an added layer of challenge clearly inspired by the Souls games. Don't bother starting it until you've slayed Grigori, unless you have a fetish for anal prolapsing. Death itself shows up to kick your ass. The expansion is pretty much all action and no fluff, easily making it the best part of the game. It emphasizes the very reason Dragon's Dogma is amazing, the combat. The fact that it still hasn't gotten a sequel 8 years later is why it makes the top of this list. Just buy it. It was literally on sale for $9 a week ago. Well, I guess I'm one of those YouTubers now. Actually, I've always wanted to do top 10s, even if they've been done to death over the last decade. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more. If you disliked it, do what you need to do. No idea what my next video is going to be. I'm sure I'll figure something out. See you next time, guys.